Today I'm going to be showing you how to make great looking village maps for your RPGs. This video is sponsored by Describe, more on them later. Greetings gamers, I'm Anto, and today I want to show you my method for making great looking village maps. We're going to be taking a tour of the Watabou Village map generator, and then I'm going to be showing you how I take that base image and turn it into something a little more interesting looking. So let's dive into it and get started. So here we are on the Watabou site. I've talked a lot about this site in the past, especially when it comes to the city map maker, which I've done plenty of videos on before, including one that you can see just up there in the corner. Now today we're going to be working on the village generator. Now if I go ahead and click on this, you can see that the base villages that it generates, we go ahead and generate a better one than that. Here we go. So the base images that it generates are pretty good looking, and a lot of these I'd be really happy to use in my game without any modification. If you were playing in a setting like the Forgotten Realms where you've got lots of grasslands, lots of hill lands, lots of greenery, these kinds of maps are perfect, even as they are with very little tweaks. But like the city generator, the village generator has a whole bunch of options that you can go in and change. You can change whether or not to show the elevation, you can turn off the titles, you can go into the style settings and play around with all of the different colors involved. Unfortunately, these color selectors don't have a color wheel or color sliders, and you have to rely on the hex code, which is part of why I use a separate program to edit that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if we come out of that, you can see if I right click here, we can go into trees and we can change whether or not there are trees in our map. We can change what type there are, from blobs to cottons to individual trees, or we can just do simple trees. I like the option with blobs because it gives us that forest look, and we can choose whether to have some, many, or none, depending on what kind of map you're looking for. If you are looking for something out in the plains, then you might go none. If you wanted something in a more forested region, you might go with an option like this where there are loads of trees. It gives you some different options, and you can go into your map parameters and change the size, what the population density is, whether there's a river, a coast, all of that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and generate a medium density river town. So you can see it makes it like that. So let's change that to high density. There we go. We get a river town with quite a few buildings. Give it another few options. We can mess around with all of these settings to get something that we want to use. And then once we've found a base image that we want to use, we right click, click export as PNG, and then we can either use that directly in our game, or if we want to take the detail a little bit further, we can bring it into another piece of software to do some tweaks to it, which is what I'm going to do today. So I've generated an image that I'm happy with, I've downloaded it, and I've brought it into Photoshop. Now the things I'm going to show you will apply whether you're using Photoshop, something like GIMP, or one of the affinity programs. They're all going to do the same thing. I'm only using Photoshop because it's what I'm familiar with. I know the process in Photoshop. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start off by changing the setting of the map. I run my game in a desert setting, so this grassland area is no good for me, so I need to change that. And then I'm going to show you how to take some extra steps to just increase the level of detail and end up with something that bit nicer. So I'm going to use this map for a desert setting, which means I'm going to need sand. So if I go over into my folder here, you can see I've got an image of some sand that I'm just going to drag in, and I'm going to resize it to fit the canvas. Now I'm doing this first for a couple of reasons, which you'll see in just a moment. So if I go ahead here and grab my eyedropper tool, that is going to give me the sand color. Now I'm going to turn that layer off, go back to my base layer, and I'm going to go up to the selection tool, and then I'm going to go color range, and I'm going to click somewhere on the grassland. Now this will give me a little window here that's got a fuzziness slider. If I move that around, you can see the colors in the box change. Everything that is white is going to be the color that it selects. Everything that is black, it's going to ignore. So you can see down at the bottom there, the trees are turning a little gray. We don't want that because it means it will partially select them. So we want to drag it all the way down so that everything is either white or black. That means we're going to have a really good color pull that we can do a lot with. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and that selects everything that is green. Next, I'm going to go over and make a new layer. And then with my paint fill tool, I am going to go ahead and I want to eyedropper my sand, hide that layer again, and then grab my paint fill tool and fill in my canvas. And immediately you can see that there is a big change. It's changed all of the grassland into sand. Even though that's made a really big change with only a few clicks, there are still some things that I need to do. If I scroll in here, you can see that all the building shadows are still green, as well as all the shadows on the trees. So the next step is to follow that same process, and I want to go in and change my shadow color. So I'm going to select my base layer again, go up to selection, color range, and then I'm going to click on that shadow color. And again, I want to change the fuzziness so that I think I've got all of the shadows selected, which I have, and then create a new layer. And on that layer, I want to paste in my color. I want to fill in that shadow color. So to do this, I'm going to grab my base sand, and then I'm just going to bring my sliders down just to make a darker version of that color. So we're looking for something that's a little less yellow, a little more washed out. Something around there will probably do. And then we go ahead and fill that in. Get rid of the selection, and you can see that I've changed the tone of the shadows to look like they're being cast on sand. Once that's done, I want to do the same things with the trees. This is a desert setting after all. Vibrant green trees don't make a lot of sense. So I'm going to come back down here, grab my selection tool again, select the trees, make sure that my fuzziness is set up so they've only got the trees selected, and then go ahead and make another new layer, grab my fill tool, make sure that we've got the eyedropper selected for the tree color, because we're going to base it off that initial tree color. And I want to bring it more to kind of a desaturated brown. That's a little bit too green. So we're going to bring it around about there. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our fill tool and see what that looks like. That is way too brown. So we're going to go ahead and introduce some more green and then try that. That's a little bit closer, but I think we could stand to have a little bit more green. So we're going to try that. I'm making a new layer for each of these just so that it fills in all of the area at once. And I think we could stand to go even more green. So we'll do one more layer and see how we look. There we go. Let's go ahead and deselect that, delete those first few layer attempts. And you can see that it's not a huge change. We've just pulled it back away from the green, more towards the brown, so it looks less out of place among all of our desert settings. Next, we want to go in and do the same for the water. So again, the selection tool, color range, we're going to grab the water. Now I'm going to change the fuzziness for this because I want to select both bands of water. So I'm going to bring it up just until I start to see all the roads and things, and then bring it down until I can't see any of them. Click OK, and that'll select all of my watercolors. Make a new layer for my water, grab my eyedropper tool, grab my fill tool, and then just fill that water with a plain blue color. Now you might be thinking, why bother to do that? The water on the base image looked perfectly good. Well, it's because now I want to go in and start adding texture, and I can only do that to these new layers that I've created. So before we dive into what I do to take the base image generated by the Watabou Village generator and turn it into something more impressive looking, I want to tell you about SIDEQUEST. SIDEQUEST is my new monthly RPG magazine that is packed full of content to inspire and new mechanics for you to use. There are things like adventures and new monsters, new classes and subclasses, lots of usable content for you to deploy in your games, but there's also content to inspire you and to make you think differently about your game. Articles on being a better dungeon master or world building topics that you might not have thought about. My goal with every issue is to make sure you come away feeling inspired and eager to go and create something for your own game. You can get this month's issue over on my Patreon for $5. The link is down in the description below, and previous issues are available to the higher tiers as well. So make sure to head down there and check it out. But for now, back to the video. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go up to our sand layer, grab our selection tool again, use the color range tool to grab everything, make sure the fuzziness is set all the way down, and we'll get a selection. Now you can use masks to do this, and if you're familiar with masks, it is a little bit quicker, but I'm going to stick with the color select option just because if you are new to Photoshop and don't know how to do any of these things, using only one tool is a little bit easier. So we're going to grab that selection with the color tool, then we're going to go back up to select, hit inverse, and that will select everything that isn't our sand. And then we're going to enable our texture layer, go up to it, and we're going to hit delete. Now it says can't complete your request because the smart object is not directly editable. That just means that we need to rasterize the image. The quickest way to do this is just grab the eraser tool, click somewhere, and it will say the smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Click OK and it will do that. And then we can go ahead and click delete. And immediately you can see what an impact that makes. It takes it from being a flat, kind of lifeless map and puts everything on these. Now what texture you use is going to be personal preference, but I think that immediately looks much more interesting than it did a few seconds ago. And then we're going to do the same thing for the water. So I'm going to come back over, grab this water texture that I've got here, bring it into Photoshop, resize it so that it takes up the space of the river. Make sure that's rasterized just by clicking on it with the eraser tool and then following the prompt. And then we're going to just hide that for a second, go over to our water layer tool, use our color range select, grab that water color, make sure we've got everything selected, inverse our selection, and then come up to our water layer and hit delete, and that will delete everything that isn't that water texture along the river. Now you can see that's quite a stark contrast, so what I like to do is go to the opacity and drop that opacity just to bring in a little bit of that texture. We just want it to be subtle, and then we can do the same thing for the sand as well. We can go in and we can reduce kind of the contrast of those dunes so that it's much more subtle. And if we go ahead and group all these layers together so that it makes it easy to toggle on, you can see that with just a few minutes work and just a few simple clicks, we can take a standard flat grassland map and turn it into something with more texture, more depth, and in a completely different setting. If you've been following the channel for a while now, you'll know that I'm a big fan of anything that reduces your mental overhead as a DM, which is why I'm really pleased that today's video is sponsored by Describe. Describe has thousands of pre-written description boxes like the ones you'd find in a published adventure to help you bring your world to life for your players. Do you need to describe the creepy castle your players are heading towards? Describe has got your back. Want to give your fireball spell a bit more pizzazz? Load up the Describe entry. Or if you need a map for tonight's game, Describe has a whole cartography collection with a selection of pre-made maps which you can load into the interactive viewer and get custom description boxes for key locations throughout the map. Many of the description boxes on Describe have been written or edited by Wizards of the Coast alumni, and they're all designed to fit in with the established 5th edition style. Describe has hundreds of text boxes available for free, but you can unlock thousands more with a monthly subscription. You can even tailor your subscription depending on what kind of things that you want to describe, or you can choose an option that gives you access to everything. And if you use the code Icarus at checkout, you're going to get 10% off your first order, which will effectively give you a free month if you're picking up an annual subscription. Check out Describe using the link below, and thanks again to them for helping to support the channel. There's all kinds of applications for this process if you want to take a village map and put it into an ice setting. Say you're playing the Rime of the Frost Maiden, then you can take some snow texture or some white and grey tones and use them instead of desert, and it gives you a lot more flexibility, but you get the base generated image from Watabou. It saves a lot of time in having to figure out where the roads are, figure out where the rivers and the coasts and the trees and all these things. You don't have to work that out. You can just take an image that the generator has given you and just do a little bit of work to make it look much better. I'd be really interested to know what other tips and tricks you have for taking pre-generated maps and turning them into something a little more impressive looking down in the comments below. But until next time, happy gaming.